Welcome everyone to the Birkbeck Futures Bite-Sized Career Series. These are mini online workshops to enhance your career. Today we're going to be looking at making more impact on video meetings and interviews. And for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to be exploring some of the basics when you're setting up your video, some things that we might forget, and some of the basic things that are really going to help us make more impact on these video calls and these video interviews. We'll look a little bit more at your mindset, something that really does play a key factor when we're going into video calls and meetings. We'll explore the 3 pillars of impact, more on that shortly. And finally, we're going to be touching on the topic of authenticity. So that's the plan for the next 15 minutes or so in this bite-sized career session. Now, to start with, it is all in the preparation. So when I say preparation, there's 3 key things that I'm talking about when we're setting up for video meetings and video interviews. You've got your sound, your video, and your internet connection. So I like to call these the SIV tests. So if you do your sound, internet, and video tests beforehand, you're going to stand a lot more chance of making more impact on these video meetings. So if we kick off first with sound. One of the first things to think about is the background noise. Now, sometimes, understandably, this is difficult to get away from, but really think about what environment you're going to be in, and is there any background noise that might impact the people concentrating on you and what you're saying in the meeting or the interview, as opposed to others. Then have a think about potential interruptions. Is there anything that you can do preparing for this meeting and interview to avoid as many interruptions as possible? Sometimes these are unavoidable, and that's understandable, but just think about, are you in a quiet space? Do you need to let your roommates know or teammates know that you are doing a call? Is there anything else that you need to set up to make sure you are hopefully avoiding as many interruptions as possible? The next thing to look at is potentially using a microphone. Some of you may be using microphones already, but thinking about your sound, and have you done a test for how you sound as well? Often the different software and platforms that you may be using, the likes of Zoom, Microsoft Teams, GoToWebinar, there's a lot of different platforms that you might be asked to use as part of an interview, or the ones that you might be more familiar with either at work or here at Birkbeck as well at university. So think about if you can do a recording first. Can you record yourself? Often these platforms allow you to go into an online space, an online room, and you'll be on your own and you can set up a recording and listen to yourself back. So think about if it's quite echoey or if there's a little bit of feedback that doesn't sound too good. You might want to consider using a microphone, and you can get some of those headsets that you might have seen other people using as well. The other thing is to speak up early. When we're planning for video meetings, sometimes we'll join a meeting, and this is the same for in-person meetings as well, but often we want to try and speak up as early as possible, especially if we're not feeling too confident. Maybe we've got some nerves, we're not used to this setting, especially being online meetings. Try to speak up as early as possible in that meeting and in that environment. In an interview, you can't really get away with this, because you will be expected to speak up early, but certainly in group meetings and team meetings, try to get something in at the start as much as you can. This will just help relax yourself. It will get people used to your voice and getting them knowing that you are on the call. Sometimes we have all been in meetings like this, whether it's online or offline, where you haven't said something for quite a long time, and then the moment kind of goes on for so long that you think if you do say something eventually, it's got to be something that's really good, because you haven't spoken for quite a while. So try to calm those nerves and try to be as confident as you can. Speak up early and just consider those areas: background noise, potential interruptions, and maybe using a microphone to help your voice stand out a little bit as well. So that's the sound area. We're then going to go on to some video tips. Now, on sort of a similar note to the background noise, think about physically what is in your background on your video. A lot of the platforms that you'll be using may allow you to set up virtual backgrounds. Some of those are great. You might want to go with the ones I like in particular are ones that look like you are in an office or you're in a sort of a professional setting, but it's because it's not too distracting. If you've got something really fancy in the background, a beach or something cool, it might distract from you more than you think. So try to think about your background. If you are using virtual backgrounds, have a play around before you get onto the meeting if you are going to use one of them, and test it out first. But otherwise, just think about what room you're going to be in. You know, are people going to be walking in and out? Can you blur the background? I know Microsoft Teams allows you to do that as well. So just really think about what's in the background, because to make as much impact as you can on these video meetings, you want the focus of attention to be on you, not what's happening behind you. So just think about your background. Following on from that, think about the room and the location. I've just mentioned it there, but where are you going to be for this meeting? Is it going to be in a room where other people can access? So again, is it going to be quiet? Can you ask people in the household to not come into that room during the next X amount of time? So think about your location, think about the room that you're going to be in, and if there are going to be any distractions. The next thing, and the next big tip on the video side of things, is to fill your frame as much as possible. And what I mean by that is try to make sure the top of your head is as close to the top of the screen as you possibly can. The reason why I say this is because this will make as much impact as you can. So the more you fill your frame, the more impact you're going to have, because you're the person that's filling that space that people can see, and therefore it's less opportunity for them to look around and see what's going on in the background as well. So when you do practice your videos, if you do a pre-record, just have a look at your frame. Are you filling the frame as much as possible? Is the top of your head as close to the top of the screen as possible? And with that will mean that your shoulders come into the frame as well. So it'll be a head and shoulders shot rather than sort of just looking like a floating head that sometimes we see on video calls as well. And finally, try to make sure you feel as comfortable as possible. If it is a video interview, understandably, nerves absolutely are going to be there. But just things like making sure you've got a glass of water by you, making sure that the room temperature is okay, you're not going to get too hot or too cold, because the more you fidget on video interviews, the more distracting it can be. So you want to make sure you're as comfortable as possible. And for the duration of that meeting or that interview, you want to, stay as still as you can and not feel the need to sort of move around or fiddle around too much as well. So 4 tips there: think about your background, the location that you're going to be in, fill the frame as much as possible. And we've got some visual examples of those coming up, and make sure you feel comfortable. Okay, so looking at our mindset. Now, I talk about mindset quite a lot, but this image on the screen, you should be able to see this, might be quite familiar to many of us, where we've gone into situations and we're sort of thinking, yes, we've got this. And it's almost like we're praying to actually make this meeting or interview go well. But what I mean about mindset is that ideally you'll be in control of what's going to happen, and you're as confident as you can be going into situations. So it's more of a confident, yes, I've got this, rather than a worrying, not too confident, quite nervous, please can this go well. So what would be great to start thinking about when you're going into video interviews or video calls is flipping things onto the positive options. So rather than, and sometimes it's quite easy for us to go into situations and think, oh goodness, what if this might happen, or imagine if this happens. Instead, try to think about what's the best thing that could happen. So ask yourself questions like, how great would it be if, and then you can fill in the blank there. So how great would it be if I joined this video interview and I felt really confident, and actually at the end of it I came out thinking, yes, I've done my best that I could have done. Another way of looking at it might be, what I want to achieve here is what? If it's a meeting that you're hosting, what do you want to achieve? I want to make sure that everyone speaks up at some point, and I want to go away feeling that everyone contributed and that I facilitated the event really well. Another option, the best thing that could happen in this situation is, again, you can fill in the blank there. So what is the best thing that could happen? I get offered the job on the spot. I know that might not happen, but that would be the best thing that could happen. And what that's doing is telling yourself and almost training your brain to think on the positive. So you're going in there feeling really positive and thinking about the best case scenarios, and therefore that's more likely to happen, rather than thinking of what's the worst thing that could happen, which unfortunately sometimes that's what we tend to focus on. And another way of thinking about this and going into these meetings is think about why you're doing it. So I'm doing this because, what is it? Is it to change a career if it's an interview? Is it to progress in your career if you're hosting a big meeting with people online? Just go back to the why. it's because you want everyone to gain some clarity on a certain topic, or it's to bring people together. It could be anything, but really try to think about your mindset when you're going into video meetings and video interviews, because that is really going to have an impact on the output and the impact that you have to the other people who are listening to you. And on that note, we're going to look at the 3 pillars of impact, and I've mentioned some of them earlier already. But if we look at these 3 things on the screen here, you've got the words that we speak, we have our tone of voice, and then we have our body language. And if I planted a question in your mind now to say, if you was to prepare for a meeting or a presentation, maybe you had to prepare a slide deck or something like that, what would be your main focus of attention? And what would you be focusing on in the preparation for that presentation? And out of these 3 things, more often than not, we focus on the content, and we focus on actually the slides, putting together a great slide deck, maybe writing down the points of what we want to get across in the meeting. And what we don't necessarily focus on is how we're going to deliver these things. And it's the same with physical meetings and interviews, exactly the same as video meetings and interviews as well. So where words are often the common focus, the biggest impact is actually our tone of voice and our body language. Now, there's a statistic that you may have heard. I tend to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but research does show that body language has the most impact on your audience, and in terms of what they get from you as a presenter, whether you're being interviewed, whether you're hosting a meeting or speaking up in a meeting, our body language really does matter. And it's the same on video as well. We really want to make sure that we've got good body language, and we'll come on to some tips on that shortly. Tone of voice is the second most impactful area. So how we're using our voice, again, some tips coming up, which is interesting. So if our body language and our tone of voice have the biggest impact on our audience, why is it that we tend to focus just on the words? So just something to go away with, and I guess a tip to go away from this session is think about when you're preparing for these meetings and these interviews, think about the how as well as the what. Yes, what we're saying is important, but actually, if we're not delivering it in a really engaging and impactful way, it may fall on deaf ears, unfortunately, and maybe people won't actually in what we're saying. So what are the tips that you can have on body language on video calls? Eye contact is a really interesting one. You'll know from your experience working with video software, whether it's the likes of Zoom, it might be in Collaborate, for example, Blackboard Collaborate in Moodle for Birkbeck sessions, or any other video software, that you get the images of everyone on the screen, which sits below actually the camera that's looking at you, and whether that's your camera on your phone, your laptop, your iPad. So next time that you're on a video meeting, try to get into the habit of actually looking into the camera on your device. Because when we do talk to people, if we look directly at them on a video call, we're not looking directly, they won't feel that we're looking directly at them, because our eyes are down slightly because we're looking at them in the image. But if you can practice it, and maybe practice it with someone, a colleague, a friend, a family member, it's worth practicing so you can see the impact that this does have. So when you make eye contact with your camera, it's then directly making eye contact with the person on the other end of that video call. And in interviews, this could be really engaging because it builds that rapport with someone, but it also makes a lot of impact when you're looking directly at someone in the eye as opposed to slightly down on their image. So really think about that. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is minimize your own video as much as possible. Often you will have the function to be able to turn your video off, because often we're tempted to look at ourselves, which is natural. We want to see how we look, especially if we are testing things like our frame. Is this okay? But the more we're doing that, the more we're not looking at the people on the other end of the phone call and on the other end of the video call. So think about your eye contact. Think about minimizing or getting rid of the video that's on you, just so you're not distracted and you are looking at them as much as possible. I mentioned it before about filling the frame, so think about your position. So make sure that your head, again, is trying to get as far to the top of the screen as possible without cutting it off, but just making sure that you are filling that frame as much as possible, and that you're quite central in that screen as well, and on that image. And finally, expressions. You may have seen people present who use hand gestures quite a lot. I am one of those. I know you can't see me at the moment, but think about using hand gestures and your expressions, because this is really going to engage people a lot more. If you're quite animated, you're showing your passion and your personality, and you can do that physically, you know, by sitting up and really leaning forward a little bit and using hand gestures in a way that's natural for you. This is really going to help make that impact for your audience as well. Here's some examples, and this is what I mean from the eye contact side of things, and also the video that we have. So often, and I know you can't see it here on this example, but I've just inserted a bit that says us. Our video is normally in the bottom left or the bottom right corner. And it's quite easy for us to look down here. Now, where I mean in terms of if you was on a laptop, your camera is usually directly in the middle at the top of your screen, and there might be a white light or a green light on there. Try to focus on the camera more than the people that are in the shot. So this is just bringing to life what I mean when I say about making eye contact with your camera rather than the people on the screen, because it really will make that difference in terms of making as much impact as possible. The other thing I'd recommend is switching to speaker view, because when you're on a gallery view, if you're in a team meeting and you want to make sure obviously you can see everyone and talk to everyone, then gallery view might be better. If you are on speaker view though, it will just encourage you to look closer to the camera, because the person who's speaking is on the screen in front of you, a bit bigger, and actually their face is closer to the camera that's at the top of your screen. This is really if you're on a laptop that this applies to. If you're on an iPad and you've got it turned the other way, then you'll notice that the camera then is on the side. But it's just something to think about, speaker view versus gallery view. And again, just to bring some of this to life, sometimes you get various people on video calls, and these are 4 of them that I wanted to highlight. You have the floating head, the distracting background, the close-up, and the missing person. So I'm just going to pull up a screen here. So this is a group meeting with lots and lots of people. You may not have been on a video call with as many people as this, or maybe you have. But just have a look around and see who jumps out at you, who has the most impact on this video call. And if you was on this call, who stands out to you the most? But also what I'd like you to do is just have a look to see if you can notice those 4 people that I highlighted. So can you notice anyone who is the floating head? Can you notice anyone who is the close-up? Can you notice the missing person? And can you notice the funky background, or the interesting background? I think I said the distracting background even. So we've had a look at those. I'm just going to circle some of them. There's no real right or wrong here, but it's just to make you aware of what I noticed when I looked at this image as well. So in the top right-hand corner, that I would say is the floating head. He looks very smiley. He's in an office background, but not making too much impact in terms of his body language, because he's not filling them. And what I'm looking at and what I can see most of is his background. Just below him, you've then got a little bit of the opposite, but you've got the close-up. So his framing is good in terms of his head is quite at the top, but he's a little bit too close to the camera. And because of that, the impact isn't quite there. What I'd rather have is see some of his shoulders and see more of him rather than just his head quite close to the camera. And if you go over to the left, so towards the middle, a little bit of a distracting background there. Framing wise, great, heads and shoulders, she's making some great hand gestures there, but I am quite focused on the beach behind her and thinking, oh, that'd be a nice place to be at the moment. So again, think about how distracting your background might be. And then finally, right at the bottom towards the left, we have the missing person. Now, one of the tips I would say is if you do need to leave the room for any reason, if you need to fiddle or distract yourself and you're part of a group meeting and you're not that person speaking at the moment, and then just pop your video off. Just turn your video off for that moment. It will come up with your name or your initials, depending on what name you put in at the start of the call, rather than leaving an empty space so that people can check out where you are. So just some tips there on the types of people we sometimes find on these video calls. And finally, just some tips on your voice. I've spoken about all of these things. So personality, passion, pitch, and pace. So the P's when we talk about tips for your voice. But really try to get some personality into your voice. Many of us might have naturally monotone voices, and we might know that. And therefore, we may want to work on getting a little bit more inflection in our tone. And what I mean by that is having a bit more of a rise and a fall. So I might speak up a little bit when I'm talking, and then I might bring it back down again. And if you are on video calls, especially if you're not using your video and it's only your initials that you can see, or maybe you're sharing a PowerPoint like I am, you've only got your voice to make that impact. And that's really difficult given that body language makes such a difference. So try to think about how you're putting personality into your voice. Imagine that you are in a physical room presenting this information. And that might sound silly and it might be quite difficult to get our heads around, but try to picture yourself as though these people are here in front of you. You're trying to project your voice and really use your body language for that. So even though you can't see me at the moment, I am using hand gestures and I am presenting this in a way as though everyone listening is there in front of me. And it really does make a difference. And it also gets you into the right mindset as well. So personality, passion, if that can come across, if it's a topic that you're particularly passionate about. If it's not, try to find something that you are passionate about in terms of what you're talking about, especially in interviews. That's really key. You know, show your passion for that role and that organisation that you're being interviewed for. The pitch, similar to your inflection, but your pitch isn't just about the volume. It's to try to project your voice as much as you can. It's not necessarily to shout or speak as loud as possible. It's just imagine that you are trying to project your voice to the end of a room to make sure that person at the back can hear you. Again, it sounds silly because it's a video call. Of course, people can hear you, but it, again, just makes sure that you're making as much impact as possible when you are in these virtual spaces. And finally, your pace. I know that I talk very quickly. That is something that I'm aware of. And when I hear myself back, I think, Jenna, you need to slow down. But think about your pace. You may naturally fast talker like me, and you don't want to slow down too much so that it feels unnatural or uncomfortable. But just think about the pace at which you're talking, especially on video calls, video meetings. It's not to take away from your natural conversational pace. I think that would be great. But when you are presenting information, maybe you're delivering a presentation for an interview online, try to be at a pace to make sure that everyone can take in what you're saying and giving them an opportunity to really let that sit with them rather than really powering through every slide. And finally, I feel like I've run over time a little bit, but it is still a bite-sized session, hopefully. And you've managed to take 20 minutes or so to listen to these tips. But the last point I want to make is around authenticity and to be authentic. This is one of my favourite slides to use because I don't know if anyone remembers Game Boys, but that's probably my favourite one in the middle. But to be authentic, you know, be your own brand. We do a lot of workshops and look out for workshops from Birkbeck Futures on personal branding, but be authentic to yourself. Everything that I've said here is tips and tricks to make more impact on video calls, video interviews, and video meetings, anything in the virtual space with other people. But it's not to say that you have to suddenly become someone who uses lots of hand gestures or talks with so much passion when not really your comfortable style. Really do try to find your own style with this. Take in the tips as much as you can, but really find what works for you, because you want to come across natural on the videos, you want to be conversational, and ultimately that is about being authentic. People will really engage with you and you'll build that rapport with others on those video calls much easier if you are authentic to yourself as well. So thank you so much for listening. That is the end of that session, the bite-sized session in terms of making more impact on video meetings and video interviews. Do look out for more sessions in this bite-sized career series. You can also connect with us and keep up to date on our social channels. Birkbeck Futures is on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram, and we've got the links there for you to connect with us if you've got a question. Drop us an email, and don't forget to check out all of the details and all of the resources that we've got on the online careers portal. So as a current student, or if you're a graduate within 3 years, you can access our online careers portal via your My Birkbeck profile.